Hello and welcome to season 66 of Backyard Farmer. I'm Kim Todd. I am so glad to be back, as are all of us, to join you for another season of answering all those gardening questions. We've got a fun program for you this evening, including answering those questions. So you have to give us a call at 402-472-1212 if you live in Lincoln. Our toll-free number is 800-676-5446. Pictures and emails for future shows go to byf@unl.edu. If you do send us an email, you've got to tell us where you're from, and you also have to give us as much information as possible. We try to get to as many questions as we can, but you can always talk to your local extension educator, or you can join us on all those social media sites, Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Pinterest. So let's start the party, Jim, with a whole box of insects.
Bugs, a bug party.
A bug party.
I just wanted to show a representation of the kinds of insects that are currently in a home. And of course, they can be a nuisance sometimes when they're in the home, but this is the time of year now when they're starting to leave. So Oriental cockroaches, believe it or not, can be out in the garage or they can be outside. They'll come in when it's warm, all right? And so they'll be around the foundation of the house sometimes. They might be an exception. But the rest of these, if you look at them, brown marmorated stink bug, yes, it's a pest. It comes to overwinter. Box elder bugs, green lacewings. We had lots of green lacewings last year coming into the homes. So a lot of people were complaining. And then we have the face flies. If you're in an agricultural area, face flies and cluster flies, blue bottle flies. I mean, there's a whole bunch of insects that actually do overwinter within homes, mostly, hopefully, undetected. And then the Asian multicolored lady beetle. Now, I had to fake the clover mites there because they're too small to see anyway. But the point is, for just this little demonstration, is that they're leaving now that the days are getting warmer. So let them leave. Don't try to kill them, because that'll create a bunch of dead insects that other insects will feed on, and then you'll have other problems. Just let them leave and concentrate on, you know, planting your garden or putting something into the landscape. So no need to treat. What a great way to think about bugs. Yeah.
Okay, Jeff, you are in the turf chair instead of in the hort chair.
Yeah, right. So this is kind of fun, and I know Sarah gets to have all the pretty things, you know, so I don't get to do that tonight. So I thought, you know, I'm going to go find some pretty things growing outside. And, you know, this time of year, we're kind of worried about our winter annuals. So they're starting to show themselves a little bit. And I found two that are kind of common early spring ones. So the larger one here is pennycress. And this is, right now, you can see it's hasn't put up its flower stalk, so it gets much bigger and kind of pretty, has a nice white flower. And then the smaller one here is corn speedwell, so it's a veronica. And again, it's another, and it has also really very cute little purplish blue flowers, so it's kind of fun. Ideally, these are really easy to get rid of right now. So you can get your, I have a lawn knife that I take out and just pop them out, or a hoe or whatever, so you don't have to worry about treating these things, spraying them, or anything like that. You want to get them before they flower and set seed. So now's the time. Ground is soft, it's a little cool, so you'll stay warm, working hard in the garden, digging these up, so this is the time.
As opposed to those chemical things that aren't going to work anyway.
Right.
Gotcha. Okay, Lauren, you think it's beautiful.
Absolutely. Well, and I like how Jeff pointed out all the beautiful attributes of weeds, so that was good with the flowers. I'm going to talk about the beautiful attributes of a lot of different diseases in the landscape, and specifically this time of year, a lot of people doing some cleanup. If you got those shrubs, I've got some red twig and yellow twig dogwood I brought along, and a lot of times we see cankers in the dead shoots. So I don't know how close we can get here, but one of the reasons that we want to control, or we want to manage this and prune out any of your dead twigs and shoots that have little cankers or areas like this. You can kind of see, I don't know if we can get close enough or not, right inside here, you can see little black specks on there. Oh, that's great. And those little black specks are the fruiting bodies that are producing millions and millions of spores. So just by pruning this out, and it's a fungal disease going 3 to 5 inches below affected areas, you can do a little shaping on red twigs this time of year, and take any of the dead branches out, and then you're really going to reduce the amount of cytospore canker you'd have in your landscape. So that's just one, and there's many other types of cankers that we see in a lot of our shrubs. And outside of, avoiding windows where you're going to affect flowering for those shrubs, really good to clean out dead branches.
And don't put those in the compost pile.
Well, these in particular, I would put them in the, the yard waste bin and get them out. If you can take them to, you have a tree lot or something where they take things, that's better to take as well, because it is going to produce spores and it would reinfect in the landscape.
All right, thank you, Lauren. All right, Sarah, don't poke yourself with that.
Yeah.
Probably too late.
I have already
Drawn
gotten
blood.
myself a couple of times with this. So I wanted to point out tonight something that you can do in the landscape pretty soon, not this weekend, but coming up pretty shortly, and that would be to prune your roses back and get rid of all of the dead winter kill from this year. So some of our roses have really taken it pretty hard this winter. We've seen a lot of winter kill in them. And so what I wanted to point out is just that the roses will kind of tell you where to prune back to. So if you look at this stem, and you can see that the tissue here on this section of the stem is brown and changing into green here. So I know this tissue is still alive. And so this would be a good point to cut the stem back to. Then if I also take a little bit closer look, I can see where there is a new shoot coming, where the new, I'm going to turn that a little bit so you can see it better. There, you can see it a little bit better now. This is where a new shoot is coming, and there's going to be leaves on this in another week or so. So I would want to cut right above that at an angle, and then my new growth is going to come from this shoot, okay? Now, why do I say don't do it this weekend? Well, we have some cold temperatures coming up, and if I were to make my ideal cut right there, there's a good chance that since I'm opening up that wound, that there could be some cold temperature damage that could come down and kill that little shoot, which would totally ruin my pruning job. So wait until we're past these freezing temperatures and these freezing cold night periods, and then go ahead and do the pruning and the cleanup on your roses and get rid of all this old dead winter kill on the stems.
Really good advice,
Okay.
and I am afraid we're going to get a lot of questions this year about dead roses.
Yeah.
I see a lot of exit holes in my old canes when I'm pruning. Is that good to get rid of those?
So yeah, it could be cane borers or some other kind of borer getting into the stems. And so an old trick with that to prevent them from getting in the spring when you're making those cuts is to put a little dab of Elmer's glue on the cut end, and that seals off that end and it prevents the cane borer larva from entering in.
Logical advice.
Yeah, sorry.
Also little carpenter bees are called small carpenter bees will get down into that pithy center, and then they'll keep burrowing deeper, which causes a little bit of a problem.
Will the Elmer's glue work on those too, Jim?
I would think so.
Okay.
Yeah, because anything that would be solid, and they're not going to work hard to try to get at something.
So a little resistance.
Little resistance, yeah. Yeah.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right, Jim, you get the first question. And this is actually from an acreage. And simple question, she wants to know what kind of this fly, so this is interior.
Okay, this
It was
is in the house.
house.
All right.
She didn't give us a scale thing, but it sure looks like a common thing that you'd find in the cupboard, and she wants to know how to get rid of it.
The first thing I would think of is Indian meal moth, but it's too grayish and too plain. But I don't know if they have any kind of like bird seed around, or if you have comb wax. It looks like it could be like a Mediterranean flower moth. It could be a lesser waxworm moth. I'm just not sure, but those tend to be kind of grayish. And so it's just a trigger to go out and look around what's in stock that you have on your storage and your shelving, whether it be birdseed or some kind of a food that you purchased but you haven't been utilizing very often, and so it's old, and so it's had opportunity to become infested with something, or something you just recently brought in. And so my best guess is like something like birdseed if it's brought in, or those little, what do you call them, it has the animal fat in it along with the, you bring those in the house, suet. Yeah. You bring those in, and those are going to be really attractive to a number of different kinds of pantry pest type insects.
So just get those pantry pest triangle things, and
Sure.
they go with a pheromone in them.
Oh, pheromone trap, like for pantry pests. Yeah, you can do that too.
Okay, perfect. All right, so your first question,
Okay.
Jeff. An awful lot of cities are having an awful lot of utility work done.
Right.
And this is Lincoln, and the bright green was the repair work, and of course their question is, how do they ever get the old grass to match the new turf, or can they?
Well, I think it's tough. I will say on campus, every year we buy grass seed, and we try to buy similar mixes, but they change the varieties each year. So there will be a different look in the color many times. So I think that's one thing that will be tough. I would guess, too, what we're also seeing here may be some fertility issues as well. So, you know, they've turned over the soil. You've got probably more subsoil up on top. The other was less disturbed, so it was better established. So, you know, I would say at this point, if they want to do something where they get some seed and overseed the entire area, so you kind of even it out, and then look at, again, kind of getting yourself on a fertilizing schedule to help kind of even out also the color a little bit that way. Those two things may help.
All right, thank you, Jeff. Lauren, I always like to get pictures from last season with questions.
Really
they
helpful.
don't want this to happen again. And this viewer, this is a Lincoln viewer also. Crabapple, 15 years old, leaves turn spotty with dark spots. Does it need treatment? With what and when?
So a couple things. So the picture we're looking at, this is scab, which is probably our most common disease that we see on flowering crabs. It can also affect fruiting apples. In general, this does not kill the tree. So, you know, if it's something that, you know, they're worried about that, I'm not too worried about it as far as treatment. If they're really wanting to control it, though, they would need to use a fungicide, make that application right when we get into the bloom stages. And so when they start, in this particular case, you're not going to put an insecticide on, so we're not as concerned about with bees and pollination. You got to be careful with that. But the other thing is, it's a good thing to bring up for people that are planting or establishing new trees. If you're looking at flowering crabapple trees, make sure you get something that's resistant to scab. A lot of the older cultivars would be. And then you can have some natural bark injury like this. I'm not sure if this is actually a disease or not, but you can just get some scarring and things in crabapples. It's pretty common. There are some fungal cankers that affect them also. But there is a fungicide there's some fungicides you can use for this, for your backyard, for control. But you're going to want to look at that during that flowering stage.
All right, thank you, Lauren.
When those leaves are just starting to open.
Sarah, this is a viewer from Ord, and they sent pictures of one of the shorter vining honeysuckles. They said last year they did have issues with powdery mildew and aphids, but then they had half of it kind of die out. Now, of course, it's twiggy, but they're seeing some of that foliage. They're wondering, you know, what should they do? Should they prune it out now? Is it something they should treat with? Any ideas on this one?
Well, I mean, sometimes honeysuckles like this do get kind of messy. You know, they have so many stems, and the stems don't live forever, and so some of them will die off, and they'll get a lot of dead twiggy growth in the middle. So if you wanted to right now, you could go through, and I would try to snap some of the stems. If you find some stems that are really brittle, then I would just prune those all the way out because they're probably dead. You might also want to think about thinning it out in the center in general, just to allow for better airflow, which might help minimize the powdery mildew next year. It probably won't eliminate it completely, but better airflow might reduce it a little bit. So what I would do is I'd start off removing anything you can tell is dead, and then maybe thin out a few of the bigger stems in the middle just to get that better airflow. And then if you need to shape it for size, you can do some selected pruning on some of the long vines and just kind of shape it a little bit.
All right, good advice, Sarah, thanks. Well, an awful lot of the state has gotten an awful lot of snow here in the past few days, and it does seem like Mother Nature and winter are holding on way too long. Now that we're back on the air, you know warm weather and green things are coming back soon, so welcome back to Backyard Farmer. We are so excited to join you on a new season of Backyard Farmer in your living room with our great information. Maybe you've already incorporated color into your landscape with those great cool season pansies or planted your cool season crops. Let's take a minute though and back up, think about incorporating color and all that beauty into your whole landscape over the entire growing season. Maybe you have your heart set on a beautiful new tree or shrub for your landscape, like this witch hazel that will attract early pollinators, or a quince, or even an old forsythia. In any case, make sure that your site will accommodate what that plant needs, and everybody will be happy. More of us want something to grow in our gardens that we can eat, whether you're starting with herbs that can go in a container on your patio, fruit trees, or even some of those edible shrubs in your gardens. Plant it where it will love it, enjoy it, harvest that largesse, and share it with your neighbors. We started our season and our show with some samples. Now it's time for you to kick back, relax in that great new patio furniture, and let us answer all your questions on Backyard Farmer. So it's time to do our favorite thing, of course, and get to your gardening questions again. And what we're going to look at is another picture question.
Okay.
And this is so much fun. This is a drawing from a grandson who saw this thing swimming in the pond, and this is near Callaway, and of course it was last year.
Like West Central Nebraska.
But they sent it to us, and the grandson said it has no legs, it has a horn-like thing on its head, it swims but no legs, it's black and yellow and 3 to 4 inches long. And you get it because it certainly doesn't belong to either one of them, and if you say it goes to Dennis, it goes to Dennis.
Well, you know, the only things that I can think of that might have a banding like that, I think that's kind of interesting that this grandson was that meticulous in observing things and even went to the point of drawing it. But anything that would be small, that would be swimming like in a pond or water, that would be yay big, might be what's considered a giant crane fly larva. Or a horsefly, you know, like the black horsefly larva too, because they're kind of like a maggot, and they have, you know, cross lines on their body, and then just a little head sticks out, you know. So I'm thinking maybe that's a possibility that's what those could be, because I cannot think of anything else except maybe some caterpillar that fell in the pond at the moment it was discovered. Help, help, get me out of here. And it was just assumed that it was an aquatic insect. So I don't know.
Yeah, well, that was fun, though. I thought that was just,
I think that's really cool, too.
And very observant.
Yes.
All right. Okay, so you have what is this turf in this turf question, Jeff. He thinks this turf is primarily bluegrass, but he's got a couple others invading.
Sure.
He says this is a thin-bladed one. It grows faster and then has what he thinks are seeds.
Right.
So his question, of course, is how to get rid of it and get back to Kentucky blue.
Well, it's buffalo grass, and so they must have somebody in the neighborhood that must have some buffalo grass, because it's not going to just pop out of nowhere. And, you know, it's obviously on the edge of the lawn, so it's a hot, dry spot, I'm guessing, and that's why I was able to get a foothold in there. The easiest way to get rid of this is to make sure that you're irrigating that part of the lawn like you are the rest of the lawn, and increase your fertilizing during the right time for cool season grasses. So you're not going to want to fertilize in June or July. You want to do your fertilizing now or here in a few weeks, and then later in the fall, in September. So those two things will help boost the cool season grasses, which make it a little tougher on the buffalo grass, which doesn't want to compete with the cool season anyway.
All right, good advice. Thanks, Jeff. All right, this is another picture from last year, Lauren. This is a viewer who grew tomatoes and put them in raised beds, and then they look like this, pretty nasty. And he did send a follow-up, which was that the soil mix is very, very rich and very heavy. So his thought was maybe early blight.
Well, and if you can stay on this picture right here, we might have a couple clues. So, and we'll just kind of talk a little bit about just tomato disease management in general. But on this one, Jim, actually, that almost looks like it could be like spider mites.
Spider mites?
Yeah.
Which many times in a raised bed situation, if it was really dry or warm around that would really be conducive for spider mites. Just a couple things I'd recommend. Make sure you're using good sanitation. If your soil mix isn't really good, make sure you got something that's draining well. Decent fertility, not excessive nitrogen. Be careful on that. And then make sure you're using sanitation to remove last year's debris. And then when you establish your new plants, use some mulch, put in soaker hoses. If you get into spider mite situations like this, actually some overhead irrigation isn't a bad thing, is it?
Yeah, that's right.
Help,
anything
natural enemies
cool the foliage down. You know, an insecticidal soap would actually work, but even looking for those first signs of spider mites and just plucking off the leaves, as long as you don't get too plucky, you know. But that really helps.
Well, and he actually had gotten some advice from somebody else who said they thought it was herbicide damage, and that's.
I don't see it in that particular case, but yeah, just overall trying to maintain, just a good balance, good water availability, and avoid splashing soil up is going to do a lot for disease control.
All right, excellent. Thanks, Lauren. Sarah, here we have a maple who's losing its bark. This is a Lincoln viewer, and it is on the south side of the trunk on this big red maple. They wonder why and what can be done about it.
Well, so obviously the bark has died, and this is a pretty common thing that we see. And when the bark dies like this, eventually it sloughs away. Now, this is not a new injury. I mean, this injury probably happened at least a couple of years ago, because it takes a while for that callus tissue, which you can see underneath the dead flap on the edges. There's new tissue developing that's trying to cover over this damaged area, and it's pushing that dead flap of bark off as it grows. So this is not new. This injury happened quite a while ago. We typically see it on the south or the west side of a tree, and sometimes this damage happens in the winter when we get sudden temperature drops, and the bark on the south or the west side is warm, and then we get a big temperature drop at night, and then the cells die, and you end up with this dead section on that side of the tree. What to do? There's really nothing to do. You know, understand that this tree has been injured and that it has reduced ability to move water up and down because that section of trunk is not functioning properly. Keep an eye on it. Make sure that it's not attacked by insects, because, Jim, like boars are commonly, they focus on these rough areas of the bark as egg-laying sites. So keep your eye on that and make sure that insects don't attack it. Make sure the tree stays well watered when we have dry periods this summer. So it's supportive care. There's nothing you can really do directly for this, but just supportive care to try to maintain the vigor of the tree and help it outgrow this damage.
Sarah, we've had a little bit of conversation also in Lincoln, at least, about overplanting of the maples in particular. So,
yeah, we do see people opting for maples if they're, say, replacing an ash tree or they're just planting a new tree. Everybody wants great color in the fall, and maple seems to be the go-to tree for that. But red maple is not well adapted to Nebraska. We see it really struggling, having a lot of issues like what you're seeing in this picture. If you have to go to a maple, a sugar maple is a better choice, but even a better choice would be something else, something different outside of the maple group, because we just have way too many maples already.
Right, exactly. All right, thank you, Sarah. You know, we've really had a lot of fun in our backyard farmer garden over these last years, and we're looking forward to another great growing season. So let's take a minute to hear from Terry James to see what's in store for this year's backyard farmer garden.
Welcome to 2018 in the Backyard Farmer Garden. As you can see, not a lot happening in the Backyard Farmer Garden right now. We do have the cover over our raised beds, and we have a few little sprouts coming up inside there with some radishes started about 3 weeks ago. We haven't seen our lettuce emerge yet, but we're hopeful. As you can see in the greenhouse, everything is green and lush. We have tomatoes, peppers, whole bunch of different veggies for the All-America Selection choices this year. We have some cool new annuals that we're going to be looking at that All-America Selection has sent us also. We have some cuttings from some of the annuals last year, so you'll see a few familiar faces in the flower pots, but they'll be in different arrangements, so stop by and see that. We also didn't stop gardening in the Backyard Farmer Garden after the season ended. When you stop by, you'll see our new irrigation system underground. Very excited. It's going to help the master gardeners get everything watered in the proper way. So stop by the Backyard Farmer Garden this year and see how we're growing.
You know, we've had some beautiful gardens in the past seasons, and this should be another fun adventure this year. So, you know, we can't wait until we can finally get things in the ground, and I'm sure that's happening all over the state, so we can show people what works and maybe what doesn't. Hopefully it all works, right?
Yes.
Okay, Jim, this is actually a houseplant question. 100 miles north of Lincoln, a rosemary plant. Did beautifully, kept it on the deck last summer, went crazy, brought it in the house last fall, dropped a few of its little rosemary leaves, but tiny little, he's calling them grasshoppers.
Sure.
Killed at least 30 and wonders what he should spray it with, because they do use it as an herb.
there might be 150 more grasshoppers to go, you know, as far as killing them. If there's no sign of damage to the rosemary, they'll be coming out. There must have been, see, grasshoppers always deposit their egg masses in undisturbed soil. So it was out there at the time, late summer or whatever, and some female deposited an egg mass in there. So once they all come out, they're all going to come out all at once. So that's helpful too. But if they aren't feeding on the rosemary, they're just going to come out, and if there's nothing else for them to feed on, they're just going to starve and die. So check and see if there's any damage to the rosemary. You can stir up the soil and see if you can find the remainder of the egg mass, but if they started hatching out, they're probably all hatched out by now, and so it's probably done and over with.
So just hit them with water and
right, yeah.
something. Okay. All right. Another turf question, Jeff, which is good since you're the turf chair.
Yeah, appropriate.
This viewer dormant seeded with tall fescue between the 12th and the 23rd of March.
Okay, sure.
And they're in Plattsmouth.
Okay.
Did have a lot of crabgrass in that area last year. Wants to know how to prevent it from taking over this year, but knows that if he uses a pre-emerge, he's probably not going to get that seed to come up. So he's thinking a post-emerge to the seedlings, but can't seem to find a couple of the herbicides, 2% and Cyduron.
It's hard to find right now. Yeah, okay. I know from purchasing products for campus this spring. There's some good products with fertilizer with tenacity. And tenacity will do the same thing. It'll help, it'll work with the tall fescue and the bluegrass, so cool season grasses, and it'll also suppress crabgrass. So that's a product that he should be able to find out there.
Okay, and
he may not, I mean, you're going to have to go to a garden center, to a place that, versus a big box store. They're not likely to carry anything like that.
And that will not suppress the new seed from
No, it's appropriate for that sort of thing, yes.
All right, all right. Lauren, this is a question about when to use dormant spray and spray for cedar apple rust. We don't know where this viewer's from, and we don't know whether that's two questions or one.
Well, a couple things. So dormant spray itself wouldn't have any activity on cedar apple rust. That would be more a spray for, well, insects, some of our fungal diseases that we'll see, scab, some of these things in the bark. You can actually have some effect on some of the inoculum that's there. And that would be before, and anybody here that works for fruit trees too, correct me if I'm wrong, because I do dormant spray typically, but before bud break, right? So before you get bud swelling. Right. As far as cedar apple rust, you're really looking at a different control mechanism. You're going to need a fungicide at the time those galls on the cedar tree are swelling and emerging and producing their teleohorns that produce the spores that come over. So probably in that, you know, mid-May zone would be my guess, early May, somewhere in there.
All right. Sarah, this is an interesting question. Came in February, so we've held it over. This person's been told for years that you have to have birds eat asparagus seeds and then go through the bird before the seeds will sprout. Have you heard this one, or do you know anything about?
I haven't heard that one, and it's not true. They don't need to go through the birds. They can just land on the ground and they can sprout just fine on their own. So
we will start the lightning round. So, are you ready, Sarah?
I am excited. Let's go.
Oh, no.
Oh, dear. She's going to win it.
Relax.
Excited and a horticulturalist.
Yeah. Oh, boy. All right. So, we have a viewer who bought a blackberry in a plastic bag, and it sprouted a leaf or two, and he's wondering what to do to keep it alive before he can put it in the landscape.
Just keep the root system moist. Don't let it dry out, and it should stay alive until you can plant it.
Okay. So, how long does it take to wait before we declare butterfly bushes dead this spring? Any idea?
I would wait until at least about mid-May. And if it's not having any shoots by then you probably can let it go.
All right. Another asparagus question. Will it grow easily from seed if the seed is fresh?
Yes. It sure will.
All right. We have a viewer who said their lettuce was planted, it was up, and now it looks frozen. Is it?
Probably, yes. You're probably going to have to reseed.
Wilted lettuce, but not the right way. And you talked about pruning roses now. What if people took them all the way down last fall? Do they really wait longer?
Well, if the question is to wait longer for them to grow, then yes, you know, you don't need to reprune them or anything. Just wait till they sprout, and they should.
All right. Boxwood are looking terrible with brown. Should they cut that brown out now?
Yeah, It's most likely, if the underlying stems are brown too and brittle, then yes, it's dead. So I would go ahead and prune it out.
I don't know how she always gets 6.
Yeah.
Because I cheat.
High numbers.
All right, Lauren, are you ready?
I'm going to keep it with classic lunch meat this year. I'm ready like bologna.
Bologna. Yeah, you're full of it too. So let's see how your answers
Here we
are.
go. A lot of passing going.
All right, we have a viewer who said they had rust on their native grasses that they've used in their garden area, and they want to plant beans. Is there an alternate host issue with bean rust there?
I don't think with native grasses. It's a good question, but I don't believe so.
All right. Okay, here we go. What is your morel prediction for this season?
Many, many baskets for everyone.
We have a viewer who said fungi came up about a month ago in their mulch pile. Would they have already done the spore thing, or did they? What would have happened there?
They could have if they have. I mean, all of our mushrooms are different fungi fruit at different stages. So if you even have a warm day and you had a real wet condition, particularly in a mulch pile, it could be warm enough that you could have growth and development of fruiting caps. So just don't eat them.
Okay. So have these cold snaps killed a lot of our expected pathogens this year, or don't we know yet?
The answer to that would be absolutely not. We preserve fungi in -80 freezers. So the colder it is, the better it is for them to survive typically.
Oh dear. All right. What's your
Good year.
snow mold prediction?
We haven't had a lot of heavy snow, so I would say it's pretty low. If we got a lot of snow in these warmer times, that's when we'd see a lot of snow mold.
All right. Nice job.
5, wow.
5. Jim's getting nervous down here in the end. Maybe sometime we'll start the other way.
That might help.
Okay, you ready, turf guy?
I guess. Let's go for it.
Okay, so this pre-emerge went down about 2 weeks ago.
Oh.
And so it was snowy, cold. Is it going to have to be put down again?
Probably, yeah, it will. So in the pre-emerge, it kind of binds to the soil. So if it gets too wet, it's not a great thing for it. So.
All right, buy it again.
Yeah.
All right, viewers seeded without covering the seed last fall. Is the expectation that that is dead?
I would guess probably, yeah, you're going to have a low germination rate with that. So if you didn't cover it at all, yeah, you're going to look at reseeding that. I would wait though. Let's see what comes up here.
All right. Should a starter fertilizer be used if they're seeding this spring?
Yeah, absolutely. Usually the starters are going to be a little bit more balanced. We don't want any phosphorus in our fertilizer, but it's going to be a lower nitrogen, a little higher potassium. Maybe add some iron to it. Something like that usually helps.
All right. So a viewer had their turf mowed last fall, but it got taken down to 1 inch.
Oh, so they can putt.
It appears as though it's not recovering. Should they be thinking reseed?
I would wait. You know, the turf this year, if you look around, it's not really greening up very quickly. Here, the
Right.
last 2 days in Lincoln has helped, but, you know, I would be patient with that.
All right. Okay. Patience.
Yeah.
You know, the way it looks, I'm due for 3 answers.
All right. You ready?
Yeah.
So how about these up and down freezes killing our pollinators? Yes, no?
They're pretty well protected, I would think. Something later on in the season with a sudden freeze would be something that would be difficult for them.
Okay, we have a viewer who saw something that looked like a fly on some flowers of willow. Would that be a pollinator or a fly or a bee or what?
Most likely flies, because they're the first ones to emerge. If it's a bee at all, it might be one of those orchard mason bees.
All right. We have viewers who are saying they have bitty ants in their house already. Which ant?
Probably odorous. Smash it, smell it. If it smells bad, it's odorous house ant. So you can bait them with something like a liquid syrup bait to get rid of them.
All right. We have another viewer who said they have tiny white insects flying around in their yard every single time it gets nice, like a day like today. Tiny little white.
Okay. Well, they're probably tiny little gnats. There's a lot of different kinds of fungus gnats that are in the turf that feed on fungi and decaying organic matter, and so that's probably them.
Okay, good, nice.
Oh, we tied.
Yeah.
Good job.
Hey,
Yeah.
man.
Yeah.
All right,
Yeah.
I don't feel so bad.
All right, and Sarah, we have plants of the week.
Yeah. These are 2 great spring plants. This is one of my favorite plants, the little one in the front. I'll move it here. This is called pasque flower, and it's a great little ground cover that you can add in your garden. Very, very short. Usually they're just really close to the ground, or maybe they can get up to 5 or 6 inches tall with the seed heads on. But they have these beautiful little kind of pinkish red buds. The buds will open up to a pretty little flower. And then even what I think is even the more attractive stage is the seed head. And you get these really fluffy, puffy looking seed heads that cover the plants, which give the plant its common name, prairie smoke. It looks like smoke almost when the seed head is open. Geum is the genus name, Geum triflorum, and they will kind of slowly spread as a nice little ground cover through a sunny area in the garden. So, you know, if you're looking for something for a ground cover for early spring color, this would be a great one to try, prairie smoke. Then the stems here, this is from Cornelian cherry dogwood, which is one of our maybe our lesser used dogwoods in the landscape. This one grows into a small tree, and so it'll get to be usually in like the 15 to 20 foot height range, something like that, with these beautiful yellow flowers in the springtime. These will develop then into clusters of little red berries that are edible. You can actually harvest them and make jelly out of them. And it's a great little clean looking small tree in a landscape if you're looking for like an understory tree or something along that line. So that's Cornelian cherry dogwood.
Excellent, thanks, Sarah. And if you want to see a big old Cornelian cherry that is tough as a box of rocks, it's the one on the west side of Plant Sciences if you're on campus. It's been there
For a long time.
a long time,
Yeah.
a long, long time. All right, Jim, you have a question from somebody who has the winter creeper euonymus, the broadleaf evergreen one. And they have little white flecky things
Right,
on
yeah.
it, and they wonder what that is and what can they do about it.
Well, that's euonymus scale. It also gets on Pachysandra as well. And the little white ones are the males. They don't require much room like the females do because they have the
Smaller
egg.
closets.
Yes, the females have a covering that kind of looks like an oyster shell, and beneath their shell are a bunch of eggs. So we usually expect little crawlers to come out somewhere around the first part of May. Then there's another generation to go through, and then somewhere in August the crawlers come out. They're tiny little honey-colored, small as little mites, you know, that would be moving on the foliage. So I'd say, like, if you have a heavy infestation of that, first thing to do is try some pruning to remove as much of the population as you can. And then when you see where the crawlers are coming out, you know, joggle, you know, up some branches over a piece of white paper, see the little crawlers coming out, then something as simple as an insecticidal soap or horticultural spray oil will kill so many of them that it'll drastically cut them back so that, you know, you'll have better looking plants.
All right, thank you, Jim. All right, Jeff, this is a viewer who has these clumps of things in their turf. Oh. And they're upright and they have a round stem and they smell an awful lot like onions, and they think it's chives that has come over from their garden. So how do they get rid of them in the turf?
Well, there's a couple ways. So especially now, again, I'm kind of talking about wet soils, and after our rain and snow this weekend, it would be a good time if you don't have a lot of them. So let's say there's 50 of them. I don't think that's a lot
to me.
But you know, if you're out there in the yard for an hour with your soil knife or a small spade, this would be the time to dig them up. You don't want to pull them because you're going to leave the little bulbs down there, and then they're going to continue to do their thing. So that would be the one thing. If it's not that bad, I would dig them this time of year.
Okay.
You know, if it's super bad, then, you know, we're mowing, we're using Trimec, we're doing that sort of thing.
All right.
But
so,
I would start with the digging.
Yeah, and nothing more fun than digging in perfect soil.
Yeah, right.
All right, good. All right, Lauren, this is a fun one, and this is a viewer who took this picture on Easter morning. He had icicles hanging from two main large branches of a river birch, and they were over 2 feet long, very cold that morning. The tree is very healthy. They're concerned that the tree is dying, and is this really icicles? And you get it, we know what this is, but you get it because it's so interesting, and you can talk about all the other things that come out of tree trunks.
Yeah, that's the sap coming out.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's
that's
not
icicles. It's a pretty picture.
Yeah.
There is, though, on trees when you tend to see, particularly birch and many trees, you see sap oozing out, and that's a good indication you have a canker, and that branch, you know, long term is probably going to go. I've seen them many years be fine, but just watch them if you see a lot of sap oozing.
Yeah, and that's a lot of sap.
That would be
out of
too
that
much for
branch.
sap, yeah.
Yeah, that's
good.
unfortunate. Sarah.
Is it sap?
Yeah.
Oh, I thought it was icicles the way it was looking. It wasn't cold. It was in the fall. I'm totally
this
out.
was-
Sorry, I'm out.
It's now, because
Yeah, I
they'll
think-
tap.
I've been in winter.
Let's vote.
Easter is
I'm
not in
out.
the fall.
Sorry.
That was last weekend. No, that's
I
when he
got it.
took that picture.
Okay.
But I've
Yeah.
never seen it do
Yeah,
that.
because you
snow
can
on Easter.
tap birches and
Yeah,
get
you
syrup
can.
from them, so.
Yeah,
There we go.
yeah. But a pretty cool picture. We've never
I-
gotten
very
that
cool.
one before.
Yeah.
All right, Sarah, this is, we're not sure where this viewer's from, but they have the PJM type rhododendron. Our viewers can probably see two little dark things there. 3 years, they're on the north side, but they have a little bit of winter burn. He's wondering whether they can be salvaged or should he pull them and plant something else.
Well, the thing that concerns me most about the picture is how small the leaves are, which I think is kind of an indication of the overall health of the plant. With the small leaves being this small, it would tell me that these plants are not doing well. And azaleas are hard to grow, especially if you don't really have great soil. I mean, they prefer to have kind of a loamy soil with a lower pH, 5.5 to 6.5. If you're living in a new construction home and the underlying soil is, clay or subsoil, these azaleas are going to struggle. And so, you could wait and see how much they leaf out, how much new growth they put on. If they're putting on little tiny bits of new growth this year, then I would probably just pull the cord and take them out and put in something that's going to be more vigorous and more adapted to that site.
And buying one that's in flower right now from some places,
Right.
we don't usually recommend that.
Right.
All right, good. Thanks, Sarah. Well, as we've been talking about all night, winter just doesn't seem to want to go away this year. Remember last year at this time we had temps in the 70s, everything was in flower, but according to UNL Professor of Climatology Ken Dewey, this slow roll into spring is actually a really good thing for our lawns and gardens. Here's Ken to tell us more.
This was our second unusual winter in a row. And what's fascinating is my climatology colleagues say it's the Arctic that's controlling our winter weather. In fact, one of my colleagues said, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. So we saw an unusually warm winter up to the north with right now record low ice in the polar seas, but down here the cold was displaced into our area. Now this has implications for what's coming up this spring. This spring, unlike last year when we were already in the 80s in March, we're having a slow progression into spring. That's good for all the plants to slowly come out of dormancy instead of suddenly shifting into summer temperatures. Now, water worries me. It's been a relatively dry winter, and right now, Colorado, much of that area is below normal in snowpack. The only above normal snowpack is way up in Montana, so that would benefit the Missouri River. But the Platte River right now looks like it might be moisture starved as we go into the spring and summer. That worries me. We're in a moist cycle, so I don't anticipate a drought increasing over our area, but we will have that concern. There has been a drought all winter long off to our south. So we're watching. Is that drought to our south going to move into our area? Could it produce what we call a flash drought? Too early to tell. The good news is we're slowly moving out of winter, allowing plants to come out of dormancy. We don't know yet whether there's any damage that was done with that very hard freeze going well below zero back at the Christmas week into the New Year's. We'll have to see as things come out of dormancy. That could especially affect decorative vegetation. My expectations are we're not going to have extremes this year like last year. So I'm not looking for 80-degree temperatures anytime soon. I'm looking for a slow progression into spring, through spring and into summer. There's no indication at this time that we're going to have a lack of moisture. The drought to our south does worry us. Is that going to spread into our area as the atmosphere heats up going into summer? We were controlled by the Arctic for our winter. That influence stops right around now as we go into spring. So our spring and summer pattern will be controlled by the climate, and that is we're in a moist pattern, we're not in a drought cycle, and it looks like no major heat waves. If you're not in a drought cycle, you're not going to have that extended period of time with temperatures above 100. My advice for gardeners is to hold off a little bit because it's probable that we're going to still have some below freezing temperatures. Last year we were well into spring by the middle of March. This year things are delayed a little bit. Some garden centers are setting up around town. I'd be hesitant at this point to put anything that's tender outside and just anticipate that it'll be a delay to the start of spring temperatures.
Patience is the key as always, and so we're just going to have to wait and see for a few more weeks because actually this is, as Ken said, a much more normal spring than anything we've seen. And it really is. I mean, it's nice to have a long, low, slow.
It is.
I think the 30-year average last freeze for Lincoln is like April 23rd.
Right.
So that's a 30-year average. So we're not even close to that yet.
No. Nope. We are tired of snow.
Yeah.
All right, you get the next picture, Jim. This is a viewer who discovered these. It's a Lincoln viewer during replacement of a door and wonders if they're termites.
Oh no, not at all. Those are click beetles, and the immature form is called a wireworm. And wireworms frequently will be feeding on roots and turf grass. They're rarely a problem out in the landscape. These probably were the wireworms that moved into the home interior to transform into the adult, and somehow they got stuck in there and then they perished. So no problem at all.
All right, perfect. He'll be glad to hear that. All right, Jeff, this is also a turf ID question, turf invading a bluegrass, and it's this one. So this is it's essentially the same viewer that had the buffalo on one side. Now they have this on.
You know, that looks like large crabgrass to me. So looking at the ligules, if you zoom in, they're pretty hairy in the leaves. So, and the way that's connected, that's what it looks like to me. And that would be kind of consistent with being on the edge of the sidewalk as well. So
I thought it was brome, but that shows you what I know.
Well, and I looked at that for brome as well, and you know, brome is pretty smooth at those points, at that leaf junction point, and that was pretty hairy when I zoomed in on it. So.
Well, and I didn't look at it as close as you did, Jeff. My first glance at that, I was thinking yellow nutsedge. So we were all over the board.
So you're right, because you're in the turf chair.
Okay, well, woo, geez, I'll remember that.
What power.
Somebody write that down.
Okay, Lauren.
Share Trump's knowledge.
Okay, this is also a turf question, but this is a viewer who said they had powdery mildew in their turf second week of April last year, and it was this. And so they're wondering, should they expect it this year, and should they do anything?
Yeah, you should really, anytime you have really shaded conditions in your lawn, you're going to see powdery mildew. A lot of times it'll be in the spring. Many times in the summer it'll go away, and you'll see it back in the fall. If it's really severe in a landscape, many times it's a good indicator of an area that maybe you shouldn't be growing grass, is what I see. If it's between buildings or something, you might consider, if it's really affecting the turf a lot, if that is an opportunity for an expansion of a mulch bed or something. I'm really not going to recommend a treatment for it in the backyard.
All right, thanks, Lauren. Sarah, this is a viewer who started cabbage seedlings indoors about 3 weeks ago. Didn't have enough light for the last 10 days. Heated above 35 at night, so that's pretty cold. It's near North Bend, but the seedlings are curling, as I think our viewers can see in this picture.
So I think there's several problems here, Kim. You can tell the lack of light because the seedlings have stretched so much in the low light conditions. And then the cold soils, the 35-degree temperatures at night is honestly way too cold. Ideal temperatures for germination of cabbage is ideally no lower than 45, preferably closer up to 60 or 65. So I think what's happened is these seedlings have just kind of really struggled in cold soil, and they have then consequently been infected with some of the seedling diseases like Pythium and Rhizoctonia, the damping off fungi that then cause the seedlings to die. And so as I was looking closer at that picture, you can see some of the stems where the stems have just collapsed, which is typical of damping off kind of death with seedlings like this. So I don't know that these seedlings are going to recover. There's not really a whole lot you can do to get them to recover once they're in this kind of a state. So what I would suggest is that he reseed with some heating mats underneath, or try to keep the seedlings warmer, ideally in that, 45 to 60 degree temperature. Make sure they have good light, and keep them on the dry side to help also reduce those root diseases. And I think you'll have better luck.
All right, thank you, Sarah.
May not want to seed right into the same pot, too.
Yeah, exactly.
So
right. Don't go back into those
really
packs.
Active,
yeah.
Get some new soil. Start over.
Good suggestion. All right, Jim, our first bagworm question, which is how do you deal with them on junipers?
Well, if you can possibly pull them off, do so now, because they're full of eggs. There'll be the male ones that are empty. Female ones are higher up, but yeah, pull them off or snip them off because they're just loaded full of eggs. That's the only thing you can do right now. Then later on, they're not going to hatch until we get it into about June, late May into June. At that point, you know, you can look for the first signs when they hatch and then try to treat them when they're really young with something like Bacillus thuringiensis. And that will help to take care of them. When they get older, they get tougher, just like all of us do.
Which is true.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, thanks, Jim. Speaking of shade and turf and powdery mildew, this is an Ashland viewer, Jeff, he lives near Mahoney State Park, acreage, lots of trees. Is there a type of turf that grows in near total shade, and is it available in sod? Or what would we recommend?
Boy, I can't think of anything that would do well in near total shade. So I think, kind of like Lauren was discussing earlier with powdery mildew, I think you're looking for some sort of herbaceous ground cover. So, and there's a ton of choices out there that you could look at. But
you know, the only thing I could think of was the Pennsylvania sedge, which looks a little turf-like, but if it's really dense shade, that's probably not going to do it.
Yeah, I think for any of those, it's tough.
All right, thanks, Jeff. Lauren, are you aware of any local sources for gourmet mushroom spawn? This viewer wants to try growing them, but doesn't really trust buying mushroom spawn from an online source.
Well, actually, anytime I've done this, I have bought them from online sources, and not to recommend one over another, but there is one that I purchased from called Fungi Perfecti that you can go and they'll sell kits, spawn, anything you need. I'm not aware of any locally, so.
All right, thanks.
Yeah.
Sarah, a wahoo grower, wants to know whether the grass clippings should be raked from the strawberries now, and then when to fertilize strawberries.
No, it's still too early. If we get those typical late spring freezes, what will happen if your strawberries get going too early is those first king flowers will be killed. And you don't want that because those are going to give you your biggest fruits. So wait. I would wait until closer till, you know, the third week in April maybe, or even the last week in April before you take that winter mulch away. And then as far as fertilization goes, as soon as they start growing, you do a side dress with, and I can't remember the poundage right off the top of my head, Kim. I'm thinking it's somewhere around a half a pound of nitrogen to a pound of nitrogen per about 100 feet of row. So.
All right, good. Jim, this viewer is planting fruit trees this year and has a question about pollinators, how to attract them. They're wondering about getting a hive of honeybees or buying some solitary bees to release in the yard as kind of the starters.
Well, if you have an apiary, you know, if you have a beehive or whatever in the vicinity of your fruit trees, that is really good. You know, a number of people will bring in those orchard mason bees because they emerge early. You get them in tubes. You know, you can buy them right now, they're refrigerated, and you put them out, and they come out early, so they're there to already pollinate the apple trees, or maybe even the peach trees or apricot trees if you have those. But I'd just say, by and large, just, you know, plant a number of flowery ornamentals in the vicinity of your orchard area too, and time them so that there's always going to be continuity throughout the season of flowers, and that's going to really draw a lot of the pollinators, and then they, of course, will be pollinating anything else that you desire as well to be pollinated.
All right, and his other question was his neighbor's spray for insects, so is that?
Yeah, that's going to be kind of hit and miss, and it's unfortunate if any drift, you know, goes, or something improperly sprayed, it hits the honeybees or the bumblebees or wild bees, so have a talk with the neighbor.
All right. Jeff, this viewer has one of the native grasses and wants to know a little bit about the life cycle of native grasses in comparison to non-natives. You know, what should he expect for die out in the center, those kinds of things.
Well, if you have it in a small prairie setting, I mean, they'll kind of vary on their longevity. So certain varieties or certain species will come in and out. If something's dying out in the center, an easy fix is just to dig that out, put in some compost, kind of redo the soil, revitalize that plant, and it should start filling in the middle.
All right, good, because they are different. They're not out there in the prairie.
Right.
All right, thank you, Jeff.